Welcome, everybody. Good evening. Calva Daddy here. This beautiful Tuesday evening. Hope you're all doing well. Welcome to part 4 of my series, The Murder of Bill J. Pumpernickel. I just want to start this video off by saying, sorry about the gap between videos. I've been really busy with school and all that junk, and I'm sorry I went back on my promise of a video every weekend. I'll try to do better. Capiche? Nice. Without further ado, let's get into the story. This is Chapter 4, Some Surprising Revelations. So as you know, the previous month, April of 1988, police ran into a suspicious-looking guy by the name of George Clint, who worked as an architect, photographer, and a telegraph maintenance worker. So he basically bounced around from job to job, but just like Nathan Andreessen and Paul Edgewood, the two main suspects in the case, George Clint, well, actually, sorry, I'm going back on that. George Clint was seen after Bill J. Pumpernickel's death. After all, he was interviewed that April of 1888. He was interviewed that April. However, just a couple days later, he mysteriously vanished. This was not too much of a coincidence for police to tie him to Nathan and Paul, but it was pretty darn strong. So, starting in May of 1988, police decide to go on a more different route. After seeing George Clint's telegraph machine in one of his office rooms, they decided to go off to the telegraph shop to see if they could do some tracking. When they were leaving, they asked for George Clint's telegraph identification number. Yes, they had those in 1888. Yeah, George Clint wrote down on a piece of paper, 808-899-4318. So starting in May of 1888, police went to the telegram shop and basically said to the operator, like, hey, we're the chief investigators of the Bill J. Pumpernickel case, and we're wondering if you could print out every telegram sent by 808-899-4318. The shop's name was 10th Telegram Archive Center, because there were 9 others. I know, very creative name. So, Tom Richards and Jack Robinson were led to a back room and said, like, okay, like, this is all my archives. We had 5 employees here, and they basically printed out each telegram and either stored it for safekeeping or sent it out to the person it was meant to be for. Before the man walked out, who was leading them into the control room, one of the officers stopped him and asked, like, hey, were there any employees who worked here who were anti or maybe against the Republican Bill J. Pumpernickel? He said, yeah, of course. There was this rather eccentric guy. Police kind of leaned in and looked at each other and said, can you give us a name? Yeah, George Clint. Police leaned back like this, and they were like, oh my gosh. George Clint worked here? Oh yeah, he worked here. For how long? Well, only oh gosh, let me think here. Early 87 to the summer of 87. He worked here for a very short time. He told me he had 2 buddies, who, from where I'm forgetting the name, but they were basically just talking and just kind of communicating. Unfortunately, that's all the information I could give you at this point. Police said, well, thank you for your time. We'll handle it from here. The door closed, and Jack Robinson was like, oh my gosh, we had him right here, and he slipped out. We had him right here. Tom Richards said, now, Mr. Robinson, there's no fussing around here. Like, we got this. Like, we're in the archives where this Clint guy worked. Like, if he worked here and archived these telegrams, then maybe we could find out a couple clues of, where his buddies are hiding. All right. I guess we'll start. So police found the storage area for 808-899-4318, and they opened it up, and where it usually says sent from was inked out in a black ink. And police reportedly asked the owner what the most cheap object was in the room they were in, and they proceeded to break said object. George Clint was officially tied to Nathan Andreessen and Paul Edgewood due to the fact that he had inked out the place where it was sent from. George Clint is now placed on a wanted list. So a couple weeks later, police are going through these telegrams, and these are a lot of printed telegrams. Starting from, like the guy said, early 1887, it was more kind of trivial stuff. Like, some of the telegrams said, like, okay, like, when are we meeting up? And another said, like, let's meet at Stanford's Bar and Grill at noon. And some even said 5, some even said 9. And when police saw Stanford's Bar and Grill, they were just like every police officer does, maybe this guy has some answers. So on May 14th, 1888, police take a little stroll over to Stanford's Bar and Grill, owned by Mr. Steve Stanford. And Steve Stanford had a lot to say. When being interviewed by police, Stanford reportedly said that in the later spring weeks and early summer weeks, he noted that the same three men would sit at the same men would sit at the same booth almost every single day. And according to Stanford, they would stay there for, according to him, up to 3 hours. Police already knew they were on the lookout for 3 men aged 20 to 30. However, police just decided to ask Stanford, can you give us a description of these men? Oi, well, I could try. It's been a while. Let's see, there was a rather tall fellow. Big shoulders, brown hair. About 20 years old. Okay. There was a shorter man with longer hair, mustache, very thick European accent. And there was another man, even shorter, glasses, an Amish-like chin-strap beard, and he was going bald on the top. And even though these descriptions were a bit outdated, they matched these up to Nathan Andreessen, Paul Edgewood, and George Clint. So they now had several reliable witnesses on what these men were doing. If only had Stanford known that these men were just plotting to kill the mayor in his restaurant, like right in front of him. But oh well. According to Stanford, George Clint brought in blueprints, photographs, and rulers, and several different writing utensils, and they just assumed, since Steve Stanford knew that George Clint was a respected architect, he simply thought that they were just going over some construction plans. After all, he observed that there were photos of Bill J. Pumpernickel's house. He simply thought that they were just doing a little renovation. So, police thanked Steve Stanford for his time, and Steve Stanford was never included as a suspect. So they now confirmed that Nathan, Paul, and George all knew each other in the months leading up to Bill J. Pumpernickel's death, and they had been plotting it for quite some time, almost a year. So it is now early June of 1888, and police are back at the telegram archives, and they're discussing something, and all of a sudden this question pops up. You know that woman, Ava Dawson, that George Clint mentioned was his grandmother? Yeah, I do. Well, I did some deep digging, and this guy lied to us. He lied? Yeah. His grandmother's name was Ava Smith, who died 8 months ago. Yeah. George Clint freaking lied to us. Police were beside themselves. Oh my god, that little snake right in front of us. We had him this close. Mr. Robinson, calm down. It's okay. No, it's not okay. We have 3 possibly armed and dangerous suspects on the loose, 2 of which broke into the mayor's house, shot him dead, and now we don't know where they are. Is everything supposed to be okay? They could be armed and dangerous. Actually, that's a valid argument. You're underreacting. So, police basically just continued to look at these archives. However, they decided to try something new. In the shop had its very own telegram Morse code thingy that I don't know the name of. So they decided to do something a little different. They decided to punch in the number 808-899-4318 to the telegram machine. And without their suspects knowing, the telegram archives would receive their telegrams. It was basically like if a group chat had existed in the 19th century, if only that group chat had consisted of law enforcement and 3 possibly armed and dangerous murders on the loose. So, things were slow for a while until about mid-June when telegrams started coming in. It was of Nathan Andreasen asking the rest of the men how they were doing. Andreasen was smart not to disclose any info about where they were. And on the little blurb about where the thing was sent, police knew that he was making up a name because when they did some map research, they found out that that town, which was coming from somewhere in Nevada, did not exist. Obviously, and I know you must be thinking, but they're in Nevada. Like, they could be anywhere in Nevada. Well, Nevada's a big state. Anywhere in Nevada could be anywhere in Nevada. We don't have that much info. At least, not yet. So. Nothing really that special happened. It was kind of slow until on June 30th, 1888, police came across several printed telegrams to George Clint's address that were dated to mid-October of 1887. Police treasured these because that was right around the time when Bill J. Pumpernickel was murdered, so they're just like, bring them to us, we need to analyze these suckers. So the first, which were dated around October 20th, and remember the murder happened on October 27th. So the first of these was dated on October 20th, and there were simply dates and times for them to meet up. Of course, Stanford's Bar and Grill was mentioned a lot. However, one telegram dated October 26th, 1887, was reportedly Nathan Andreasen telling George Clint where to pick them up after they, quote-unquote, finished the job. There were 3 telegrams that day. That was the first telegram. The second telegram was George Clint replying. He's like, okay, so here's what you want to do. There's a private drive behind Pumpernickel's house, and he has a secret escape hatch. Remember how I said that Bill J. Pumpernickel's house had a escape room in case an armed intruder or invader got in? It's like, I'll pick you up there, make sure, get your gun, get everything you need, and be as quiet as possible. And when you get outside that opening, run like hell. I'll be waiting for there about a block away. There was no direct access to this because it's on a dirt road, and my Harrison buggy will not handle that. It's a nice buggy. I don't want to ruin it. And then the third telegram was Nathan Andreasen replying, okay, is there any lock or combo that we should be concerned of? And George Clint replied, nope. All you have to do is just righty-tighty, lefty-loosey the hatch. The tunnel's about 100 feet long, and then you should pop up in one of the back rooms of the house. The door may or may not be locked, so you may want to bring a crowbar to bust that thing down. And when police were reading this, they were just like, okay, this is good info, but how does George Clinton know about this? Well, they did a little research, and they found out that one of George Clinton's first architectural projects was in 1883, and they found out that, after some training, George Clinton was the chief designer of Bill J. Pumpernickel's house. He knew it inside and out. And with these records came a photo of a group of construction workers building a house, which was later determined to be Bill J. Pumpernickel's house. And standing right in the foreground, holding a crowbar like this, was none other than the 26-year-old George Clinton. He was right there in front of the house. And police were like, they looked back to their records from October and said, oh my gosh, that's why there was no signs of a struggle. That's why there was no signs of a forced entry or exit. They were in the house. They knew how to get in. Oh God. Oh my God. This is terrible. It's terrible. It's terrible. So, on July 3rd, 1888, police tell the telegram station to try to tap in to try to see if they could pin a location to where the suspects are hiding. However, the telegram station said that would not be possible due to not only the technology not being around, and they said that they could not decipher the made-up name that possibly Nathan Andreessen was making up. The rest of the week was quiet until 4 days later, when a telegram was printed off, and it was Paul Edgewood asking George Clinton what he did with the Harrison buggy. Now remember, back in May, police went to interview George Clinton again and found that he and the buggy was gone. Gone. So they decided to contact Jimmy John's Rent-A-Buggy and told him, and they asked him if, Paul Edgewood returned his Harrison buggy. And Jimmy John said, well, actually, he's way past due. I never got that buggy back. And police were like, okay, what do you think he did with it? He's like, I don't know. I'm not a chief executive, detective. I sell buggies, for crying out loud. Okay, well, that's a help. However, later that day, soon after Mr. Edgewood asked Clint where the buggy was, George responded, yeah, I dumped it in the valley. So about 15 miles west of Rattlesnake County was a valley called Dry Bones Valley. And it was Dry Bones Valley because it was very dry except for a massive river going right through the middle of it. And this river was called the Edison River. It was about 45 feet deep and about 100 feet wide. It was a great spot for fishing. However, on its southeast bank, it was not too crowded. So that would basically mean, criminal activity is going on. So, on July 8th, 1888, a team searched Dry Bones Valley. Wow, English. And after hours and hours of searching across the river's southeast bank, they found no trace of a buggy. And this news crushed detectives. They had their suspects' names, however, and they had their appearances, however, they did not know where they were. And that was the crucial evidence. Let me remind you, forensic evidence would not be around for another 100 years. Police had to basically rely on instinct to know where these guys were, and they basically had nothing. So detectives had no choice, and the Bill J. Pumpernickel case went cold. That is it for Chapter 4. of the murder of Bill J. Pumpernickel. Tune in next weekend, I promise this time, for Chapter 5. Calvadaddy, out.